The cab crunched to a halt on the gravel drive, kicking up dust that shimmered in the late afternoon sun. I stepped out slowly, knees stiff from the 5-hour ride through winding country roads. Dorian appeared on the front porch before I even closed the car door. "Mom!" He called, smiling wide as he came down the steps. He pulled me into a tight hug, warm and firm, the way he used to when he was a boy. "It's so good to see you." I nodded, unsure if the sudden sting behind my eyes was joy or exhaustion. "You, too, Dorian." He took my smaller suitcase, left the heavier one for the driver, and led me toward the house. That's when I saw her Siobhan. Polished, pristine arms crossed over a white blouse that likely cost more than my entire travel outfit. She descended the porch steps with a smile too wide to be sincere. "Verlene," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. "What a journey." "Huh?" I smiled back politely. "Long one, yes." They exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. Then Dorian said, "Let's show you where you'll be staying." We didn't go up the steps to the front door. Instead, Dorian turned left, guiding me across the well-kept lawn, past the garden, through a wooden gate I hadn't noticed at first. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows as we followed a stone path to a structure in the far back corner of the property. It was painted the same pale gray as the house, a converted barn with a single window and a crooked weather vane. My heart sank. "We've done a little work on it," Siobhan said, unlocking the door. "It's not the Ritz, but it's private and has its own bathroom." Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood and mildew. A cot sat in the corner covered with a stiff brown blanket. A lamp flickered weakly near a small table. The bathroom, separated by a thin folding door, looked like something from a roadside motel. "It's just temporary," Dorian added quickly, "until we finish the guest room." I nodded once. My hands stayed on the suitcase handle, but I didn't move. The wind outside rattled the barn wall lightly as they stepped back toward the house, leaving me alone in my new home. By dusk, the light inside the barn had dimmed into a soft amber glow, barely enough to read the faded buttons on the old space heater. I'd kept the door cracked for air, but the breeze only made the room feel colder. I perched on the edge of the cot and stared at the window, the only real connection I had to the house across the yard. That's when I noticed the lights flicker on room by room. First the kitchen, then the living room, then a strand of twinkling bulbs strung across the patio. Laughter echoed faintly across the lawn. People were arriving, voices I didn't recognize, shoes clicking on tile wine glasses, chiming. From the narrow barn window, I could just make out Siobhan in a sleek black dress holding court by the kitchen island. Dorian stood next to her in a blazer, laughing too loudly at something a man in a vest had said. At one point, someone popped a bottle, and the group erupted into cheers. The music started soon after jazz, something expensive sounding, and I could feel the bass all the way from where I sat. Not one glance toward the barn, not a single word about me that I could tell. I unzipped my bag and took out the sandwich I'd packed at the bus station, turkey and Swiss, wrapped in foil, still slightly damp from the ice pack I'd tucked in. I ate in silence while I unpacked the little I'd brought: 3 dresses, a pair of house slippers, a photo of Harold from our trip to Glacier Bay, a small wooden jewelry box with my mother's brooches. I lined everything up on the shelf above the cot, slow and careful, like I was in a motel I couldn't afford, but had no choice but to stay in. It was past 10 when the door creaked open and Dorian peeked in. "Hey, just checking in," he said, already halfway back outside. "Did you get settled?" I nodded. "Yes, thanks." He smiled, distracted. "Great, we'll catch up more tomorrow." Then he closed the door, and I heard his footsteps disappear into the laughter again. I folded the foil from my sandwich and placed it in the wastebasket, then pulled the blanket over my legs and stared at the ceiling fan's slow, uneven spin. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds nesting somewhere in the rafters above me. The heater had gone out in the middle of the night, and my joints ached as I eased myself upright. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, made myself some instant coffee from the kettle I'd brought, and stared through the narrow barn window at the fog lifting off the grass. Around mid-morning, the door opened without a knock. Dorian ducked in, carrying 2 mugs. "Thought you might want some real coffee," he said, handing me one. "Thank you," I said, accepting it carefully. The mug was warm, but his eyes were scanning the room like he was taking inventory. He smiled, motioning at the small space. "You've made it cozy. I do what I can." He nodded, then sat on the chair, crossing one leg over the other. "I was thinking about your condo," he began. "Seattle's market's crazy." "Right. You must have gotten a good price." I sipped the coffee, buying time. "Decent. Enough to take care of what I needed." He leaned forward. "You didn't have any major debts, did you?" "No, just the usual." He hesitated, then laughed lightly. "Well, that's good. You're smart, Mom. Wish Siobhan and I were better with savings. The remodel's been killing us, and we've got some cards we're trying to pay down." I nodded, saying nothing. My fingers tightened slightly around the cup. "Anyway," he said, standing abruptly, "let me know if you need anything. Really, your family." That night, after washing up in the tiny sink, I lay awake with the lamp off and the window cracked. The voices started around 11, muffled but clear enough. "She won't say no," Dorian said. "Where would she go?" Siobhan's voice was lower, annoyed. "Then just ask her again. Be more direct." There was a pause, then a soft clinking of glasses. I rolled over, slowly facing the wall. My breath felt heavy in my chest as the words echoed long after the house fell silent. The knock came just as I was folding my nightgown and placing it under the thin pillow. I opened the door to find Siobhan standing there, perfectly put together in yoga pants and a linen tunic, balancing a tray with eggs toast and a tiny glass of orange juice. "Thought I'd bring breakfast today," she said, with a smile that barely reached her eyes. "Hope you like over easy." I stepped aside and let her in. She placed the tray on the little table like it was an offering. "Thank you," I said, sitting carefully on the edge of the cot. She hovered for a moment, brushing non-existent crumbs off her shirt. "Actually, I also wanted to talk to you about something. Nothing major." I nodded slowly, waiting. She exhaled. "It's about the party. The one you saw." She hesitated the other night. "It wasn't just social, actually. It was also sort of a soft pitch. Dorian's been courting investors for this renovation/consulting pivot he's doing with his firm. The catering was important. I picked up a piece of toast and took a small bite, chewing slowly. "Well," she said, folding her arms, "now the caterer needs to be paid by Friday. It's 25 and 25 by 5 years. Then to send to fusion house. Not a huge amount, just bad timing with the credit lines being tapped right now." I sipped the juice. "I see." She softened her voice. "It's just a loan, Verlene, not a gift. We'd pay back the moment we land this deal. And honestly, it's probably more secure than a savings account." I looked at her carefully, setting the glass down. "I'll think about it." Her smile tightened. "Of course, no pressure." She left without finishing her coffee. The barn was quiet again. I didn't touch the eggs. I placed the tray by the door and sat back on the cot, arms crossed. I wasn't thinking about loans or caterers. I was thinking about what else they might ask and how long they'd pretend it was about helping me. They were in the backyard when I opened the barn door, a crack posing, laughing the golden hour light, casting halos around them. Siobhan adjusted Dorian's collar while he angled the phone just so. I could hear her say, "No filter, baby. It's perfect," before the shutter clicked again. Inside, I folded my wool sweaters into the bottom of the blue suitcase, the one they hadn't touched since I arrived. I added my heavy scarf, the lined boots I wore once a year, and a tin of Harold's old cufflinks I couldn't quite let go of. The rhythm of folding calmed me, precise, unhurried. The barn's Wi-Fi barely held, but it was enough. I called in a favor to Eleanor, an old friend from Mendocino, who put me in touch with her estate attorney. By mid-afternoon, I had signed the necessary documents electronically. The vacation cabin quiet, tucked between redwoods, once co-owned with my late cousin, was now listed in my name, alone. I hadn't visited it in years, but now it called to me like something sacred I'd forgotten. That evening, Siobhan served takeout on fine plates, chicken marsala, some roasted vegetables she claimed she made herself. She poured me wine and asked how I was sleeping. I smiled, nodding. "Like a baby," I said. I even asked for seconds. Dorian talked about the contractor's delays with the basement and mentioned a friend from college who was crushing it in property tech. I listened, hands folded in my lap, my expression soft, engaged. I even complimented the table linens, but after dinner, while they watched a streaming series in surround sound, I stepped back into the night air and into the barn. I closed the door gently behind me, exhaled, and opened the documents one more time on my phone. Everything was done. The title had transferred. The passwords were updated. The mailbox key was still taped to the bottom of that rusted desk drawer in the cabin. I brushed the dust from the suitcase handle and zipped it halfway closed, just enough to keep them from noticing too soon. For the next few days, they played at sweetness. A tray of tea would appear each morning, steeped and honeyed, placed beside the barn's rickety door like a peace offering. Dorian brought over a small space heater used, but functional, and knelt down to plug it in himself, fussing over the knobs like a solicitous hotel concierge. "Should warm up the place faster now," he said, brushing off his hands. "You deserve to be comfortable, Mom." I thanked him with a smile, even touched his arm, and he smiled back like we'd shared a genuine moment. One night, Siobhan arrived with a pile of linens and a lavender-scented pillow. "For your back," she said, her voice syrupy. "You mentioned stiffness, and I figured this might help." I hadn't mentioned anything of the sort. They began asking what I wanted for dinner, if I'd considered joining them for a weekend drive to wine country. Dorian left a bottle of elderberry supplements on the table with a sticky note, "Stay healthy." And then, of course, came the real ask. We were sitting in the kitchen, Siobhan and I, while she chopped vegetables with the ease of someone pretending not to care deeply about my answer. "You know, Verlene," she began, "we've been talking about your future. We're just worried." I watched the knife slice smoothly through a carrot. "You're alone. No husband. New surroundings. It's not safe to manage everything on your own at your age." She slid the slices into a bowl and looked up. "Have you considered giving Dorian financial power of attorney just for security? It would let us help you if anything ever went wrong." I nodded slowly, placing my hands in my lap. "That's thoughtful. I hadn't really considered it. You should, she said softly. I can print something up, just something to review. I'll look into it, I said, matching her tone. She smiled satisfied and turned back to her cutting board. I stayed quiet steady, giving her no hint that the document she wanted to print would never leave her desktop. That night, I added 2 locks to my suitcase. They set the table like they were hosting royalty. A linen runner stretched across polished oak candles flickering low. The air smelled of seared steak and rosemary, and some soft jazz played from a Bluetooth speaker tucked behind a vase of peonies. Dorian held out my chair with exaggerated courtesy. Tonight, no barn talk, just good food and good company. Siobhan brought out the plates, all arranged, like something from a cooking show, steak fanned perfectly beside roasted fingerling potatoes and haricots verts glistening with butter. She poured the wine herself, a deep red, with a label I recognized from a Napa Estate tour Harold and I had taken 20 years ago. To family, she said, raising her glass. We clinked. I sipped. The wine was excellent. Conversation stayed pleasant through the salad course. Dorian talked about a new project at work that could really take off if the next investor call landed. Siobhan complimented my earrings ones she'd never noticed before and asked about the weather in Seattle as if it were some ancient land she'd always longed to visit. Then, as dessert arrived, a cheesecake she claimed to have made, but clearly hadn't Siobhan slid something across the table. A manila folder, slim, folded neatly. No pressure, she said, smiling. Just review it when you can. Thought it might give you peace of mind. I didn't reach for it. Right away, just glanced at the corner, poking out beneath the cheesecake plate. Power of attorney. I didn't need to see the rest. Still, I picked it up delicately, like it was a dinner napkin, and slipped it into my purse. I appreciate you thinking ahead, I said, keeping my voice warm. Truly, I'll take a good look. They beamed at me, proud, relieved, maybe already counting the imaginary balance they thought they'd soon control. Dorian refilled our glasses, and we raised them again. This time, his voice was steadier. To family trust. I clinked glasses again and smiled. Under the table, my fingers brushed the zipper of my purse, resting on the very document I would never sign. I rose before the sun, the barn still cloaked in shadows. My suitcases were already packed neatly folded sweaters. The framed photo of Harold, a small box of keepsakes, my documents in a leather folder. Everything I'd brought had somehow become less than what I was taking with me. By 7:45, the morning light had turned gold at the edges of the sky. I rolled the larger suitcase to the barn door, careful not to let it scrape the wood. The smaller one followed behind wheels cracking softly over the uneven gravel. I paused for a breath, glancing back just once at the barn. I owed it no goodbye. At exactly 8:01, the cab pulled into the drive. A navy blue sedan with a quiet engine and a driver who nodded politely as he stepped out. He reached for the bags, but I held one back. No need, I said. Just the trunk. The front door of the house creaked open behind me. I heard the hurried thud of Dorian's steps before I turned around. Mom, he called barefoot, coffee sloshing over the rim of his mug. What's going on? Siobhan wasn't far behind, still in her silk robe, eyes darting between me and the cab. I'm moving out, I said calmly. I already found a new home. Dorian blinked as if I'd spoken in another language. Wait, what do you mean? You didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I replied. I've made arrangements. I've signed a lease. I'm leaving. The driver gently closed the trunk and opened the back door for me. I stepped forward. "Is this about last night?" Siobhan asked. "The paper. We were only trying to help." I met her eyes briefly long enough for her to know I saw right through the act. "No," I said. "This is about everything." Dorian started toward me again, hand raised like he might block the door, but he paused when I looked at him. Not angry, just done. I slid into the back seat, and the cab pulled away. The sun had barely risen when I rolled my suitcases down the gravel path. The wheels snagged on rocks, but I didn't stop. Each tug forward felt like another piece of my past snapping loose. The cab idled by the gate engine, humming low, a quiet promise of something else. I was within 5 steps when I heard the door slam. Mom Dorian's voice cracked like a whip in the still morning air. "What's going on?" He jogged toward me, shoelaces undone, coffee still steaming in his hand. Siobhan came right behind him, tightening a robe at the waist, her hair still in rollers. I turned and faced them without flinching. "I'm moving out," I said. "I've found a new place. I'm leaving today." "You can't just leave," Siobhan said, her voice brittle. "Not without talking to us. I'm talking now." Dorian's eyebrows pulled together. "Is this about the power of attorney?" "We were just trying to help." "No," I said calmly. "You were trying to control. You offered a cot in a shed and called it kindness. You watched me unpack beside a space heater while you clinked glasses in the house." Dorian set his coffee down. On the gravel jaw clenched. "You're twisting everything. We welcomed you. You welcomed my money." "You're our mother," Siobhan added sharply, stepping between me and the cab. "This is unfair." I looked at them, tired, panicked, cornered. Unfair is asking for $30,000 while pretending it's about love. Unfair is hiding behind duty while planning how to spend what you haven't earned. Dorian's voice turned cold. "If you walk out now, don't bother coming back. Ever. I won't." He stepped forward and grabbed my wrist, not hard, but enough to stop me. "You owe us an explanation." I pulled free. "No. What I owed, I already gave. And I've given enough." I opened the cab door, slid inside, and closed it gently behind me. Through the window, I saw their mouths moving, but I didn't listen. The car pulled away, tires crunching over gravel, taking me toward something they'd never understand. The new apartment smelled of lemon oil and fresh paint. A modest one-bedroom near the coast, tucked above a quiet street where gulls wheeled overhead and the ocean murmured beyond the buildings. I set my bag down, turned once in the room, and let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. There were no barn walls, no overheard whispers, just quiet. I unpacked slowly, folded each blouse, hung my scarf on the back of a real chair. Harold's photo went on the windowsill, angled to catch the sun in the late afternoon, just how he would have liked it. I touched the frame. "You'd hate the carpet," I whispered, "but you'd love the silence." That first night, I made soup. Real soup, not a sandwich hunched over in the dark. I ate by lamplight with no noise except the soft clink of my spoon. When I finished, I opened a book, then set it aside. My mind was full, but calm. No budgeting for anyone. No sideways glances, just mine. The next morning, I walked to the park 2 blocks away. Magnolia trees swayed in the breeze, and a group of older women fed ducks near the water. One of them waved. I waved back. By the 3rd day, I'd enrolled in a watercolor class. I hadn't picked up a brush in 40 years, but the instructor smiled and handed me a palette. Start with what you remember. My first painting was a little crooked, and the shading was clumsy, but it was mine. I tacked it to the fridge that afternoon, like a child, proud of a first try. Weeks passed. I knew no one would call to check in. Not Dorian, not Siobhan, but somehow that made the silence even sweeter. One evening, I lit a small candle and carried Harold's photo to the little side table by the window. Outside, the sea rolled in under the moonlight. I sat beside him in the glow and whispered, I finally remembered I matter too. Then I got up, rinsed my teacup, and left the light on for myself.